Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Angela Brennan and today I'm going to be showing you how I use the Spellbinders January 2025 club kits. I've got quite a few club kits that I showcase here, and I start off by showing you how I put together the large die of the month called the Botanical Atrium. I die cut all the pieces in colored card and you will see how I put them together. I've got quite a few different club kits that I use in this video. The main ones are the large die of the month, the stitching die of the month, and the stencil of the month, and I've time stamped it so you can go to the set that you want to watch at any point in time, so do check that timestamp out. I find it easier because I do use these club kits across the creations that I have. The club kits complement each other so well that I do use the large die of the month with the better press of the month, especially for the sentiments, and I use the embossing folders and the sentiments in the stitching die. And if you see the stencil of the month, I have used almost all the key or main club kits like the large die of the month, the small die of the month, better press of the month in creation of that composition of those cards. So do check it out. I like putting the club kits together because I get more out of it. And I just think the sentiments, especially from the clear stamp of the month and clear die set of the month, really complement and work with all the other club kits in January 2025. In assembling these pieces, you need a couple of key items here. Having liquid glue with a nice pointy tip as well as a media picker tool is really helpful. The media picker tool comes in really helpful with those really tiny pieces. So once you get the hang of putting these die cut pieces together, you can create almost any card. And see this little bunch of flowers? This is where I use them in quite a few of the other club kits as well. These foliage and flowers are so versatile, and I really hope you see the potential of it, using it in so many other cards other than just in this club kit on its own. I've gone with colors that I think complement one another. So pinks, purples, a little bit of a blue and greens. I think they go well together. Now in putting these things together, sometimes I also use a thin dimensional tape for this piece, for example. For the middle piece in some of my other cards, I have used a very thin dimensional tape just to give it a little bit of a lift. So it's up to you whether you want to use dimensional tape or you just want to keep it all flat with just liquid glue. And that is a personal preference. I hope you enjoy these videos and find them informative. I've got some really positive feedback, and that's really helpful in helping me carry on with these videos. Do leave me a comment and let me know what you think. I always value and welcome feedback, good or bad. So I really hope you enjoy the video, and if you do, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And when you do subscribe, remember to press that notification bell so you're alerted when new videos are uploaded. I'm going to start putting out videos of club kits where I showcase a few club kits at the same time because I use them across the piece, and also it saves time putting out a video at a time because I think these longer videos with timestamp seems to be fare a lot better, and I showcase more club kits at the same time. Sometimes having so many dies to die cut in a set can be a little bit daunting. But as they say, practice makes perfect. I find that once I put them together at one, then I can start using them for multiple cards. And you get the confidence as you start die cutting and assembling them. So you can't just make one card with these die sets, you gotta make a few. Here I'm starting to put together the card, and this card is going to be a shaped card. It's going to be the shape of that domed botanical atrium, which looks a little bit like a bird cage. I just put a little bit of color in the background because I didn't want it to be too stark, and I'm using my liquid glue to start attaching some of these foliage and flowers onto the front. There is no exact placement of where you put the die cuts. You just got to go with the feel. I just randomly put the foliage and the flowers to see how best I can fit it in that space of that shaped dome cage looking background. I don't know what to call it, but I just kind of added flowers here and there, and a couple of the flowers that I had multiples of it, one of the flowers anyway, because I really like that flower, and you'll see me use it in quite a few of the other cards. And if the stems of any of those flowers or the leaves are too long, just break it off, just cut it off and just use it to whatever that suits your composition and how you're putting the card together. And if you notice, having different colored foliage really helps make it stand out. If not, they all overlap and you can't see one leaf or one foliage from the other. So you see this composition here, you can put that bunch either with a tiny flowers, or I've put one here with a bigger flower covering that area. So it's really versatile, and I don't use all of it. See, I've die cut too many pieces and I don't have to use all of it. For the covering frame, it's very thin spacing where you can put the glue, and I only put it at the edges. You don't need to put it in the middle. And I'm just dotting the liquid glue on it, and I will smudge it on a scrap piece of paper. So you take out all the excess glue before you place it onto the card front and just press on the edges, and you can see how beautiful it looks. I really like how this card turned out. I love the colors. I love the subtle background blue. I think it all goes so well together. And here I've got a sentiment, and I've die cut it from the stitching die of the month. It just says for you. And later on you will see how I also add a sentiment from the better press of the month, which I did some foiling. And I show you the better press of the month and the foiling in a different video, and you can find that in my YouTube channel, Angela Brennan Creations. And I'll also put the link in the description below. Here I'm just die cutting that shape again and doing some scoring so you can open the card and just attaching it at the back of that card front, so you can just open it later on. And these little cute butterflies, I decide to layer them. You don't have to layer them, but I do layer them here because I think it looks pretty, and I didn't want two butterflies, I just wanted one. But having them layered that way with two different colors, or one lighter and one darker, just makes it look lovely and natural. And there you go. It's pretty much completed, and you can write your sentiment in there, and you can just even place it onto the surface that way. I really hope you find this card lovely. I do. I really like it. The next card I'm going to do is going to be a shaker card. I decided to use an A7 card. So an A7 card is a 5" by 7" card, and I cut a slightly smaller version from the base card, and I think just using my nesting dies, I've cut a smaller size from that A7 card, and I'm going to place that dome shape there to die cut it out. There you go. So this is the opening for the shaker card, and with any shaker card you need an acetate. This is not really an acetate. Ages ago I bought a whole box of transparency film. In the olden days they used to have overhead projectors. Obviously you don't have that now because you've got PowerPoint for everything. So I got a whole load of transparency film, and that's what I use instead of acetate, and it does the job. So here you can see I'm using black for the intricate frame. You'll see me, I put the black on and then I'll change it later on, but you'll see me do that. So I'm just using strips of dimensional foam strips really to put it in the across the entire piece of the back of the opening for the shaker card. So I'm just placing all the straight elements first, but when I place the foam, the dimensional foam strips on the shaped piece, I remove the strip on the top because it's easier to make it curve across or along the shape that you want. Though it's not straight, it's easier to do that when you remove that additional protective strip. It's just more amenable to move it to the shape that you want. And once I've done that, it's pretty much just placing whatever you want. And I think I use some kind of gold discs in the shaker card. I do quite a few shaker cards. I did like making shaker cards with this shape. So you'll see some additional shaker cards that I'll show you at the later on in the video once I finish this bit here. In a little while actually. So there you go. I've got the shaker element in there, and I'm just placing that smaller piece on top. And there, the shaker bit's done. Now you're just left to decorate the card. So here I did the same version, dotted all over. Here I've done the dotting all over, not just in the frame, but even in the middle of that shape cover there, because I wanted it to really stick onto the acetate. After placing the black and the background with the gold discs, I wasn't too happy. So what did I do? I decided to die cut another one, and this time it's gold, and I place it on top. So you don't have to, it's not wasted. You can still put your color that you want. Sorry, my hair is coming into the frame here. But anyway, you can see what I'm doing here. And I just added some foliage and a sentiment called Happy Birthday. Now I made quite a few birthday cards here because I've got quite a few birthdays coming up. So I decided to create a few of them. And here you see I've added that sentiment from the Better Press of the Month to this card here. And here are all the cards I've created. Here is another version of it. I've done the background with a 3D embossing folder. Again, similar concept but different color combination. And that's the best thing about these cards. You can just go crazy with your color combinations. You saw me put this card together with the shaker cards, and the rest of it are all shaker cards. This is shaker cards with some sequins, colorful sequins. I just like to play with different color combinations, and then you can get a totally different looking card. This is also an A7 card measuring 5 by 7 inches. And here is an A6 card that I've done a shaker card as well. A6 card measures 14.8 centimeters by 10.5 centimeters. And I've used glitter in these two shaker cards. I got loads of glitter. And here I've used the butterfly that I foiled from the Better Press of the Month. And most of the sentiments here are from the Better Press of the Month as well. The next one I'm going to show you is the stitching die of the month. I really like this stitching die. And I've put these 3 dies together here. I've taped them together to do the die cutting of the frame. So here is the frame that I've die cut. And whenever I've got stitching, I die cut 2. I just find it easier to stitch when it's a sturdier surface. So I just dot my liquid glue onto this and make it thicker by doing it by attaching the 2 pieces together. If I try and die cut a thicker card, sometimes the little holes for the stitching doesn't die cut very well. So I find it easier to use a general word. I think this is about 200 GSM card that I die cut twice and attach them together, and it just makes the stitching so much easier. And here are all the pieces. There's not many pieces here in the stitching die of the month, but I've die cut them all to show you how I'm going to put them together later on. So again, I've used colored card. My mission is to try and finish up all my colored card here. I've die cut the pieces to show you how I'm going to put the little cute ladybug together. It's not a difficult piece to do some stitching. And here are 4 curved sentiments. One set is a gift for you, and the other one is thank you so much. You can use for you separately. You can use thank you separately as well. So I used them together in a couple of different cards, and here's how I die cut them. And once you've die cut all these pieces, it's a matter of assembly. First, I'm going to show you how I assemble the little flowers. The little flowers these are the flowers you can use in other cards as well, because it's so easy to put together, and they're just a nice little embellishment to have on the flowers. And I do use them in the 4 cards, or most of the cards that I use for this stitching die. They're so easy to put together. And this is where the media picker tool comes in to put the little tiny pieces. So the tiny centers that go in the middle of the flower are also, I've die cut them. You can see 6 of them I've die cut to put it as the spots on the ladybug. You can use that, or you can use the stitched element. And I'll show you how I use both in a couple of different cards. So I'm using some diamond metallic thread, gold thread here to do the stitching. And rather than use any sticky tape, I'm going to trap the thread behind the stitches there. You can see how you can just trap it by putting the stitches one by one to trap the thread at the back of the die cut. Now, if you're a beginner, don't use metallic thread, because you need to hold it all the time to make sure it's nice and taut for every stitch. So if you're a beginner, use the DMC or Luca S cotton thread, and these threads come in plies of 6 threads together. So remove them one by one and use 3 ply, all 4 the maximum. But 3 strands to 4 strands is okay. You don't want to use too thick. If you use all 6, it gets too stiff and difficult to do your stitching. So I use the diamond metallic thread here, and I stitch. It takes a little while to do the stitching. So these are things you want to probably die cut, attach them all together, and have a whole load of it. And then you can either watch your favorite TV serial or a movie, or even just listen to an audiobook. So that's what I kind of did for most of my stitching, as you'll see in the other cards that I use for the stitching die as well. And you can do just the sides, or you can also do the one in the middle. So follow the etching. When you die cut, you can see the etched lines there, or the grooves where you need to do your stitching. It's very easy to follow. So it's entirely up to you on whether you want to stitch partially or stitch fully. Because I do love stitching, I tend to go all the way with the stitching. So it's a personal preference, this one here. So once I finish the stitching, I just start putting the card together. But you need to do the stitching of the other bits as well. So this is the back of the ladybug. Like this one I use a sticky tape, a tiny bit of sticky tape, and it's really straightforward how to do the stitching for this piece that goes onto the back or the body of the ladybug. Just follow those lines. You can see those lines when you die cut these pieces. There'll be lines that are indented on the card that you can see clearly and follow. And that's the beauty of these Spellbinders dies. It doesn't really take too much thinking. It's not too complicated, but when you take the trouble to put them together, you get some really amazing results. So again, with these stitching, I do die cut a whole load of them, sit and stitch them all together. So once you get all the stitching out of the way, then it's a matter of compiling them and putting the cards together, and you can come up with some creative compositions. I've shown you a few ways that I've used it, but I'm sure there are more ways out there. So this is my take on it, because I can do 10, 15 cards and still find different ways. I need to draw a line somewhere. So I'm using what I call Stonehenge paper here. I've had a few in my bulk stock, and I decided to use that, and I split a little bit of water behind it before I put it through the embossing folder. And this is the 2D embossing folder, so use the right sandwich for it. And look how beautiful this faceted petals embossing folder looks, and this is the background of it. And I always emboss a card panel that is bigger than my card base, so I just use double-sided tape on the front of the card base and attach the embossed card panel. So I just need to cut the excess around the card, and there you have a nice flush piece of embossed panel on the card front. This is how I tend to do it. Some people use liquid glue. I don't personally like liquid glue when I'm attaching it to the card front that way, so double-sided tape is what I normally use. I use a thin dimensional tape to attach that stitched frame onto the card front. Now you can use foam squares, but I decide to use this thin dimensional tape because while I want to attach it with dimensional tape, I don't want it to be too thick, because I don't want to have the card too thick and it's very difficult to put through the post. So here I'm just putting a slightly, I think it's only about 1 millimeter, but just to give it a slight elevation, it's easier to attach it to the card front. And look how pretty it is already. Now to assemble the ladybug. I've got two little fronts there, and I decided to use the slightly grayer version of it. First I was going to go with the dark blue of the body of it, but I wanted to stand out a little bit, so I decided to use a grey that I'm going to use on the head as well as the spots. So if you can see, even the backs of it, I've decided to use thin dimensional tape to put the little ladybug wings and have a little bit of a show of the body there. You can put it flat together as well, it's totally up to you. And here's the little head that I've used the same as the tentacles in the front. That's the ladybug done. I will add the little spots later on. You can use the spots or you can use the stitch circles. In another card I show you how I use the stitch circles. So it's really up to you. This is my take on it. This little dots that I'm going to use come from that little flower center. And this is the sentiment, a gift for you. And that's from the stitching die of the month as well. So as I showed you, I die cut that earlier. So just attach that. Easy enough to do. With these club kits, sometimes the challenge is picking out the colors. You can do so many different cards and they can look similar, but just with different colors you can have a totally different card. So I'm just attaching the spots here with a little bit of glue, and of course my media picker tool comes in really handy here, and that's why I like having it handy when I put all these little die cuts together. Next I'll just attach those flowers in the corner there. Just a little bit of an embellishment. You don't have to put it because without the flowers it's still nice, but I decide to add it to the corner there and it just finishes off the card. I like sitting and thinking about the colors, how to put it together, how to come up with a different composition. That's kind of why I enjoy doing these Spellbinders club kits, and I hope you find joy doing that as well. So here's the first card that I've done. For the next card, what I've done is pretty much the same thing, but I've got a background where I've done some ink blending. And these are the ink blending colors that I've used with Distress inks. You can see different videos I've done where I've told you the key components you need for a really successful ink blending. And here I've used variegated thread. So you've got threads of different color. That's DMC thread, and I've used 3 strands of it to do that stitching here. And I've pretty much taken the colors of that thread to do the background of the card. Also, that influenced the choice of the colors I use for the ladybug. And you see the head of the ladybug, I've done some extra stitching there, because it's totally up to you if you want to do the extra stitching. You don't have to follow the edge lines. You can do additional stitching as well. And I've used the thank you so much sentiments, curved sentiments, and I decided to use that in white. It's not the clearest, but you can see it when you look at the card in real life. Maybe it's not so clear in the video. So there you go. I've added additional flowers, and that completes the card. But with that ink blended background, it just makes it look quite a bit different. And here is the tiny circle. I'm going to show you how I stitch it. So I'm using 3 strands of DMC thread here, and I'm just going to stitch at the back. I'm just going to trap that thread at the back without using any sticky tape. Sometimes when the die cuts are so tiny like this, there's no way you can use sticky tape. So trying to do the trap method is probably easier. And because it's so tiny, don't even try to use metallic thread in this. It's going to be so difficult. Using cotton thread to do this, it's so much easier. I've got other stitching die videos in my YouTube channel. Do check it out, because I do enjoy stitching dies, and I do show quite a lot of different ways that I've done stitching. And I adore the fact that Spellbinders has got a stitching die club kit. Sometimes the stitching is a little bit more involved. Sometimes it's simpler, like this month it's quite simple. But some of the months the stitching is a lot more, and I do enjoy them, putting them together. But this month's border, you can use it quite a lot. The border, the oval border where I did the stitching earlier, you can use that on its own as well. So you'll see me use that later on when I do the stencil of the month. I like incorporating that frame into that stencil of the month, and I think it's really pretty. It does take time, yes, but I think the results are quite amazing. So it really depends on how much you like stitching. And having them all die cut and next to where you sit to watch telly or whatever, it really helps, which is what I do, which is why I am always doing something craft related when I'm sitting and watching telly or listening to an audiobook. And here you go, that's completed there. Now, I didn't have to do that circle as well, but I decided to do it because I just wanted to add additional stitches to it. And here I'm doing partial ink blending just with one distressed ink color, Dusty Concord, just at the bottom there before I attach this frame here. Again, I've used variegated thread, and this variegated thread has got purple and green with a little bit of brown, which has influenced all the colors that I've used in the ladybug in the background, as well as the little flowers that I've used as an embellishment. And the hello here, the sentiment, I have done the foiling from the Glimmer of the month. So they've got a few sentiments, and this is one of the sentiments from the Glimmer of the month. You can see that in a different video I've done, and you can find that in my YouTube channel as well. You don't have to stick to your traditional ladybug colors of red and black. You can kind of experiment with different colors as long as it all coordinates together when you put your card together. For the next card here, I'm not going to stitch the ladybug, but I'm going to use the center of the frame to do some sentiments. So the sentiment comes from the clear stamp and die of the month, Nature's Darts. So I'm going to stamp it directly onto the gold center here using some white embossing powder. So when I do embossing powder, before that I use my anti-static powder. Make sure the stamp is ready to receive the ink. So I'm just getting rid of that sheen that comes with the new stamp. Stamp it with some clear embossing ink, and then use my Misty to make sure that ink is nicely pressed into the card before I sprinkle the superfine embossing powder, which is a white embossing powder. I find superfine white embossing powder ideal for sentiments because it really gets the sentiments clearly, especially when they're as fine as this stamp here. And then I'm using my heat tool to melt the embossing powder. And there you go. You've got a beautiful sentiment in the center. And this is another sentiment from the stamp set, which is Smile. And I love the fact that these sentiments come with coordinating dies, so I can die cut additional layers to give the sentiment a little bit of dimension. So here I die cut additional Smile die cuts and attach it together. And the background of this card is the 2D embossing folder Faceted Petals. And then there you go. Putting this card together is nice and easy. Those little flowers there are from the large die and small die of the month. And I decided to keep it all white because I didn't want to detract from that beautiful stitched frame. and I like the way this card turned out. Simple and yet quite punchy, I think. I like the elegance of that white die cut flowers. Here are all the cards that I've created with the stitching die of the month. I've tried to make each of them look slightly different just to show you they can use one small die set, not many components to this die set, and create some amazing cards, and they all look so different just because I put them together slightly differently, but I've also chosen different color palettes. Not all of them have to follow your typical ladybug colors. If you're not used to stitching dies, I encourage you to give it a go because I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Just give it a try. Now for the final set here, it's the stencil of the month. And the stencils of the month has got 5 stencils here, and they are numbered in the corner, either in the right hand bottom corner or the left hand bottom corner. But I've put my numbering with my Sharpie at the top because I don't have the best eyesight, and it's easier for me to see it with a darker Sharpie color at the top. But the 4th and 5th stencils, I've moved it around. So I've made what they've labeled the 5th stencil as my 4th stencil, and what they've labeled as the 4th stencil as my 5th stencil, because the 5th stencil is when I tend to use a glimmer paste, which means it's finally done and I can leave it to dry. And here's an example of what I've done. Let me show you how I use the stencils. I absolutely adore this stencil. I only wish rather than a frame, it was a whole card front. I hope going forward Spellbinders will do a whole card front of these kind of flowers with a stenciling or layering stencil. I would absolutely adore it. It's very easy to put this stencil together. Now you just need to find a good corner, and I use my stamping platform for the corner, and I place the card there. And the card that I'm using here, now I usually use the Strathmore card for this, but here I've decided to use the Stonehenge card. I found a block of Stonehenge cards that I have in my stash, and I find it goes really well. I'll put the link to that card that I'm using here, and I actually like the way the ink stays on the card here. So I'm going to be using the Stonehenge card for more of my stenciling and ink blending going forward. I'm using the Spring Bouquet set here from New. Use whatever inks you have in your stash. You just need to make sure that there is a nice color coordination. So the reason I've chosen this is because they've got three different gradations of pink, and that goes with what I want to put on the colors here. Now for the first time I do this here, I'm just using very simple colors. So all of my flowers are the same color but different gradations of pink, and I don't do much ink blending here, so there's no shadows that I add, not much anyway. But going forward you will see in my other stenciling that how I show I add some additional shadow. And that's why when you first start using any product, the first one is very much a trial. So here you can see I'm just adding the colors, going through the layers of stencils and adding the colors, and subsequently I will start adding a bit more shadow, slightly different colors. So you get a bit more confidence with the product you're using, and that's why you just cannot make one card with these Clubkits. And here you've got almost complete here, and this is the final stencil. What Spellbinders is labeled as the 4th stencil, I'm using it as the 5th stencil because this goes to the center of the flowers, and I'm going to use the Nuvo Glimmer Paste Glitterati Gold with my palette knife and add some glimmer paste to the centers of all the flowers. Now the thing about using this glimmer paste is you need to make sure you wash your stencil and your palette knife and wherever the paste is touched on your stamping platform as well, because it will dry hard and ruin your products. And remember to wash your stencil immediately as well. And if you look at my glimmer paste, I've got a little piece of press and seal on top of it before I screw the top of the container on, because that keeps the glimmer paste nice and moist and it doesn't harden. It's just a little tip that I've seen somewhere and I've used it successfully. And all I need to do is leave this to dry, keep it aside to dry, and I continue doing various other colors as well. Here I've done the first layer with Aqualicious, which is a lighter teal, and now I'm using a more detailed blending brush, so it's a smaller blending brush, and just using the next color, Teal Cave, to add a little bit of shadow. So just adding a little bit of a variation to the color of the flowers here, just because I think it would look nice. And I'm only doing it the flowers, not for the flowers or the other flowers. You can see there's a petal, so the darker color is the petal of the lighter, larger flowers. I'm not adding anything there. So now here I'm going to be using a slightly different color. So So that's the thing here. Now that I've got a bit more confidence and I know what it looks like, so I'm using a different color just for the flowers. And as you use a layering stencil, the first time you're just going to do a trial and see how it all comes out. By the time you do the second and third stencil, you know that you can try different variations. This is my favorite club kit for January, and it comes very close to the large die of the month. So the large die of the month and the stencil of the month are my favorites. Oh, I also like the frame in the stitching die of the month. So components of it, these are the favorites that I like absolutely. And I really hope that this kind of flower stencil of the month is done more, because I would like to see a full card front of this, because it'll make a really beautiful card and easy to make as well. All you need to do is some ink blending, some shadowing of the colors, darker colors, and just think of color palettes. How fun and easy is that to put cards like that together? So here again, I'm using a darker orange. First I used the Snapdragon, now I'm using the Marigold with my detailed blending brush and just adding some shadows. And that's why when you do stenciling, you need to have varied brush sizes to do successfully, so you can add the colors. And here's another size of a blending brush. It's the mini blending brush to add a lighter color, the chamomile, in the center of the larger flowers. So there you go, you get a totally different look. And I'm going to add my leaves here. The leaves, I'm using the parrot, but I'm also going to add some gradation to the leaves by using the darker green olive. I also add another layer, the darker green, which is moss. So I use a couple of darker greens to add a little bit more dimension to the leaves, so that when it's dry, because some of these dye inks, they dry lighter. So I wanted it to be quite visible, the gradation or the difference between the shadows in the various flowers and leaves. I think it's worth putting in the effort to do all of that, because the resulting colors or the resulting stencil flowers look beautiful. And here are all the stenciling that I've done here. And look at the difference in the colors that I've done. And just using different colors. Yes, this is a more oldie worldy color, muted colors. And this final one is my absolute favorite. I do one more, but you'll see that later on. I used the different Spellbinders club kits to embellish each of these stencil frames or flowers, nature's frame I think they call it. And I'm stamping the sentiment from the clear stamp of the month directly into the center of that frame, and I'm going to sprinkle it with some super fine gold embossing powder. I think gold goes well with this muted colors of the frame, and I'm going to melt that embossing powder with my heat tool. I always start from the back so the super fine embossing powder doesn't fly away, and it just attaches the card beautifully. I'm going to attach the card to the front of an A2 card. This is a A2 card which measures 4¼ inches by 5½ inches, only because the frame fits the A2 card beautifully and doesn't go really well on the front of an A6 card. And this stitched frame here in gold is from the stitching die of the month. So I'm using the stitching die of the month and the clear stamp of the month to embellish this card. You saw me do this smile earlier on, and I'm just adding that to the center of the card and nothing else, because I think the nature's frame of that stencil flowers in the background just is beautiful enough, and I don't want to detract from that or that stitched frame. And there you go, that's the first card completed. For this card here, the pink card, I'm going to use a couple of different layers from the notched corner frames. So I've got one in gold, and the second one, the smaller one, I have embossed it with the 2D embossing folder, faceted petals, and I'm adding flowers from the large die of the month, and the sentiment congrats is from the glimmer of the month, and the little butterflies are from the large die of the month as well. So I like adding all the different embellishments, and here are all the cards that I've completed with the stencil of the month. You saw me put this together with the stitching die of the month and the clear stamp of the month, and here is the large die of the month, and I've die cut that frame with that same background and I've attached it there, and I've just added the sentiment from the better press of the month and the 2 flowers from the large die of the month. So you can see all how the club kits all can come together. And here you saw me put together this one as well. I like using these notched corner frames or these nesting dies for the middle of the cards. I think it's beautiful. And this is my favorite color combination of that stenciled background. I love how the orange, teal and purple go together, and the sentiments again from the clear stamp of the month with some die cuts from the large die of the month. And finally here, I've got the small die of the month, the dragonfly, and I've kind of tried to make all the colors go together with the sentiment from the better press of the month. So here is an example of all the stencils of the month and how I've used the other components of the club kits to embellish the card. Here's a close-up of all the cards I've made. I really hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And when you do subscribe, remember to press that notification bell so you're alerted when new videos are uploaded. I have put links to all the products I've used in the description below, as well as a link to my YouTube channel and links to the other Spellbinders Club Kits from January 2025. I really hope you enjoy making the cards and are inspired when you receive your club kits. Thank you so much for stopping by. I always appreciate comments, so do feel free to leave a comment and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much for stopping by. Happy crafting, and I'll catch you at my next video. Do take care.